A minute later, Philip and William burst in. The same thing had happened to them. They had no wings and no arms, and they were really tiny. They were about as big as robins. "Mama, Mama, Mama," chirped Philip. "Look, Mama, we can fly." And they flew up into the air. "Come down at once," said Mrs. Grigg. "You're much too high." But before she could say another word, Philip and William had flown right out of the window. Mr. and Mrs. Grigg ran to the window and looked out. The two tiny boys were now high up in the sky. Then Mrs. Grigg said to Mr. Grigg, "Do you think we could do that, my dear?" "I don't see why not," Mr. Grigg said. "Come on, let's try." Mr. Grigg began to flap his wings hard, and all at once, up he went. Then Mrs. Grigg did the same. "Help!" she cried as she started going up. "Save me!" "Come on," said Mr. Grigg. "Don't be afraid." So out the window they flew far up into the sky, and it did not take them long to catch up with Philip and William. Soon the whole family was flying around and around together. "Oh, isn't it lovely?" cried William. "I've always wanted to know what it feels like to be a bird." "Your wings are not getting tired, are they, dear?" Mr. Grigg asked Mrs. Grigg. "No, not at all," Mrs. Grigg said. "I could go on forever." "Hey, look down there," said Philip. "Someone is walking in the garden." They all looked down, and there below them, in their own garden, they saw 4 enormous wild ducks. The ducks were as big as men, and what is more, they had great long arms like men instead of wings. The ducks were walking in a line to the door of the Grigg's house, swinging their arms and holding their beaks high up in the air. "Stop!" called the tiny Mr. Grigg, flying down low over their heads. "Go away, that's my house." The ducks looked up and quacked. The first one put his hand out and opened the door of the house and went in. The other one went in after him. The doors shut. The Greggs flew down and sat on the wall near the door. Mrs. Grigg began to cry. Oh dear, she sobbed. "They've taken our house. What shall we do? We have no place to go." Even the boys began to cry a bit now. "We will be eaten by cats and foxes in the night," said Philip. "I want to sleep in my own bed," said William. "Now then," said Mr. Grigg, "it isn't any good crying. That won't help us. Shall I tell you what we're going to do?" "What?" they said. Mr. Grigg looked at them and smiled. "We're going to build a nest." "A nest?" they said. "Can we do that?" "We must do it," said Mr. Grigg. "We've got to have somewhere to sleep. Follow me." They flew off to a tall tree, and right at the top of it, Mr. Grigg chose the place for the nest. "Now we want sticks," he said. "Lots and lots of sticks. Off you go, all of you, and find them and bring them back here." "But we've no hands," said Philip. "Then use your mouths." Mrs. Grigg and the children flew off. Soon they were back carrying sticks in their mouth. Mrs. Grigg took the sticks and started to build the nest. "More," he said. "I want more and more and more sticks. Keep going." The nest began to grow. Mr. Grigg was very good at making the sticks stick together. After a while, he said, "That's enough sticks. Now I want leaves and feathers and things like that to make the inside nice and soft." The building of the nest went on and on. It took a long time, but at last it was finished. "Try it," said Mr. Grigg, hopping back. He was very pleased with his work. "Oh, isn't it lovely?" cried Mrs. Grigg, going in and sitting down. "I feel I might lay an egg any moment." The others all got in beside her. "How warm is it?" said William. "And what fun to be living so high up," said Philip. "We may be small, but nobody can hurt us up here." "But what about food?" said Mrs. Grigg. We haven't had a thing to eat all day." "That's right," Mr. Grigg said. "So we will now fly back to the house, go in by an open window and get a tin of biscuits when the ducks aren't looking." "Oh, we will be pecked to bits by those dirty great ducks," cried Mrs. Grigg. "We shall be very careful, my love," said Mr. Grigg, and off they went. But when they got to the house, they found all the windows and doors closed. There was no way in. They looked at that beastly duck Just look at that beastly duck cooking at my stove, cried Mrs. Gregg as she flew past the window. How dare she? And look at that one holding my lovely gun, shouted Mr. Gregg. One of them is laying in my bed, yelled William, looking into a top window. And one of them is playing with my electric train, cried Philip. Oh dear, said Mrs. Gregg. They've taken over our whole house. We shall never get it back. And what are we going to eat? I will not eat worms, Philip said. I'd rather die. Or slugs, said William. Mrs. Gregg took the two boys under her wings and hugged them. Don't worry, she said. I can mince it up very fine and you won't even know the difference. Lovely slug burgers, delicious worm burgers. Oh no, cried William. Never, said Philip. Disgusting, said Mr. Gregg. Just because we have wings, we don't have to eat bird food. We shall eat apples instead. Our trees are full of them. Come on. So they flew off to an apple tree. But to eat an apple without holding it in hand is not easy at all. Every time you try to get your teeth into it, it just pushes away. In the end, they were able to get a few small bites each, and then it began to get dark. So they all flew back to the nest and lay down to sleep. It must have been at about this time that I, back in my own house, picked up the telephone and tried to call Philip. I wanted to see if his family was all right. Hello, I said. Quack, said the voice at the other end. Who is it, I asked. Quack, quack. Philip, I said, is that you? Quack, 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 quack. Oh, stop it, I said. And then there came a very funny noise. It was like a bird laughing. I put down the phone quickly. Oh, that magic finger, I cried. What's it done to my friends? That night, while Mr. and Mrs. Gregg and Philip and William were trying to get some sleep up in the high nest, a great wind began to blow. The tree rocked from side to side, and everyone, even Mr. Gregg, was afraid that the nest would fall down. Then came the rain. It rained, and the water ran into the nest, and they all got as wet as could be. And it was a bad, bad night. At last the morning came, and with it the warm sun. Well, said Mrs. Gregg, thank goodness that's over. I never want to sleep in that nest again. She got up and looked over the side. Help, she cried. Look down there. What is it, my love? Said Mr. Gregg. He stood up and peeped over the side. He got the surprise of his life. On the ground below them stood the 4 enormous ducks, as tall as men, and 3 of them were holding guns in their hands. One had Mr. Gregg's gun, one had Philip's gun, and one had William's gun. The guns were all pointing right up at the nest. No, called out Mr. and Mrs. Gregg both together. Don't shoot, please don't shoot. Why not? Said one of the ducks. It was the one who wasn't holding the gun. You are always there shooting at us. Oh, but that's not the same, said Mr. Gregg. We are allowed to shoot ducks. Who's allowed you? Said the duck. We allow each other, said Mr. Gregg. Very nice, said the duck. And now we're going to allow each other to shoot you. I would have loved to have seen Mr. Gregg's face just then. Oh, please, cried Mrs. Gregg. My 2 little children are up here with us. You wouldn't shoot my children. Yesterday you shot my children, said the duck. You shot all 6 of my children. I'll never do it again, cried Mr. Gregg. Never, never, never. Do you really mean that? Asked the duck. I do mean it, said Mr. Gregg. I will never shoot another duck as long as I live. That is not good enough, said the duck. What about deer? I'll do anything you say, if only you put down those guns, cried Mr. Gregg. I will never shoot another duck or another deer or anything else again. Will you give me your word on that? Said the duck. I will, said Mr. Gregg. Will you throw away your guns? Asked the duck. I will. I'll break them into tiny bits, said Mr. Gregg, and never again need you be afraid of me or my family. Very well, said the duck. You may now come down and By the way, I congratulate you on the nest. For a first effort, it's pretty good. Mr. and Mrs. Gregg and Philip and William hopped out of the nest and flew down. Then all at once, everything went black before their eyes and they couldn't see. At the same time, a funny feeling came over them all and they heard a great wind blowing in their ears. Then the black that was before their eyes turned to blue, to green, to red, and then to gold. And suddenly, there they were standing in a lovely bright sunshine in their own garden near their own house, and everything was back to normal once again. "Our wings have gone," cried Mr. Gregg, "and our arms have come back. And we are not tiny anymore," laughed Mrs. Gregg. "Oh, I'm so glad." Philip and William began to dance with joy. Then high above their heads they heard the call of a wild duck. They all looked up and they saw the 4 birds, lovely against the blue sky, flying very close together, heading back to the lake in the woods. It must have been about half an hour later that I myself walked into the Greggs' garden. I'd come to see how things were going, and I must admit I was expecting the worst. At the gate, I stopped and stared. It was a queer sight. In one corner, Mr. Gregg was smashing all 3 guns into tiny pieces with a huge hammer. In another corner, Mrs. Gregg was placing beautiful flowers upon 16 tiny mounds of soil, which I learned later were the graves of the ducks that had been shot the day before. And in the middle of the yard stood Philip and William with a sack of their father's best barley beside them. They were surrounded by ducks, doves, pigeons, sparrows, robins, larks, and many other kinds that I did not know, and the birds were eating the barley that the boys were scattering by the handful. "Good morning, Mr. Gregg," I said. Mr. Gregg lowered his hammer and looked at me. "My name is not Gregg anymore," he said. "In honour of my feathered friends, I've changed it from Gregg to Egg. And I am Mrs. Egg," said Mrs. Gregg. "What happened?" I asked. "They seem to have gone completely dotty, all 4 of them." Philip and William then began to tell me the whole story, and when they had finished, William said, "Look, there's the nest. Can you see it? Right up at the top of the tree. That's where we slept last night. I built it all myself," Mr. Egg said proudly. "Every stick of it." "If you don't believe us," Mrs. Egg said, "just go into the house and take a look at the bathroom. It's a mess. They filled the tub right up to the brim," Philip said. "They'd been swimming around in it all night, and feathers everywhere." "Ducks like water," Mr. Egg said. "I'm glad they had a good time." Just then, from somewhere over by the lake, there came a large bang. "Someone's shooting," I cried. "That'd be Jim Cooper," Mr. Egg said. "Him and his 3 boys, they're shooting mad. Those Coopers are the whole family." Suddenly, I started to see red. Then I got very hot all over. Then the tip of my finger began tingling most terribly. I could feel the power building up and up inside me. I turned and started running towards the lake as fast as I could. "Hey," shouted Mr. Egg, "what's up? Where are you going?" "To find the Coopers," I called back. "But why?" "You wait and see," I said. "They'll be nesting in the trees tonight, every one of them." And that's the end of the magic finger. I hope you enjoyed it.